We're going to be talking about annotated bibliographies, which is probably one of the more challenging and intimidating assignments that I'm going to give you this semester. But I want to do what I can to make the process easier for you. We're going to use the Vic and vaccines case that we talked about earlier in the consulting project. If you haven't seen that video, it's worth going back and getting oriented there. Our hypothesis there was, are there more cases of autism among children receiving MMR vaccinations than among children not receiving vaccinations? And our independent variable was the MMR vaccine, and the dependent variable was the diagnosis with autism. And perhaps we're going to be interested in other kinds of developmental issues. So what kinds of data might we look for? We might use case studies like Wakefield's. That's probably not going to be our first choice. We're probably going to be looking more at epidemiological studies, so what is happening in this country as opposed to that country. And there are actually some randomized controlled trials where people are either given a placebo or not, and we're able to see how, whether these children are diagnosed with autism in the future. We might also look at meta-analyses, and remember, meta-analyses are up here where it pulls together all sorts of research and helps us to understand patterns that are there. Theoretical reviews, looking at all the research and trying to make some sense. And as we've talked before, those are the strongest kinds of research that we have available. So in terms of keywords, we're going to be looking probably at vaccines and autism. On the content tab, there is a folder with materials to help you with your writing and with your research, and one of the things there is a glossary of psychological terms, and that can be helpful, just sort of paging through and thinking about what things might be useful. This is from the library homepage. I typed vaccines and autism into the search bar, and this is what I found. So you see, here's again our keywords, and so you might even just start here if you were already in. I didn't put any limiters on it. It probably would have been useful if I had said full text and scholarly, peer-reviewed, although I've gotten some nice things here. You see that there are lots of things on autism and vaccines, so I'm not going to have any problems there. As you're looking through, you're going to see that some of them offer PDFs. Oops. So you can actually go straight to the source. Others you're going to have to request through Iliad, and Iliad's available through the library homepage. It's a borrowing system. You're going to need probably a couple days in order to do that, but for something that you really like and want, that's going to be very useful. And then other things are, you're going to be able to see through Science Direct, and sometimes Science Direct gives full text, often it doesn't, and so you're going to be concerned about that. What I'm going to do when you're submitting your annotated bibliography, I'm going to look to see whether you could reasonably have seen and read the article available. So if you're giving me something with, PDF full text, that's great. If you're using something from Science Direct, I'm going to be a little bit more skeptical. Okay? And if you give me a web page, I'm going to be extremely skeptical. And, that's just not the kind of research that you need here. So what makes good research? So full text, having a PDF, for example. Having it recent. So if you were to give me something from 1977, I'd go, probably you're going to be giving me things from, from this century, unless it's something really unusual. Peer-reviewed, and that's one reason why clicking those boxes on EBSCO's page, would be very useful. And you want it to be reliable and valid. So a lot of articles allow you to, or will actually say and identify whether there is some sort of conflict of interest. And, so for example, someone who's doing research on smoking who's working for a tobacco company, probably we're going to be a little bit concerned about. We're going to be thinking about issues of bias. So what if you don't find the information you want? And sometimes that's going to happen, unfortunately. So maybe you find instead a theoretical article, and that theoretical article includes some citations. I'd go look at some of those citations. You're not going to find citations for everything, though. Perhaps you can approach your hypothesis from another perspective. So, for example, you may not find a nice experimental study of, the relationship between autism and vaccines, but you might see what happens when vaccines are given in other countries. Or you might see what happens as vaccines have changed across time. Perhaps you'll find recommendations, but then discover that there isn't good evidence or enough evidence on your question. That will be useful down the line. Not your first paper, but your group paper. Where you'll be able to say, one of the things we really need is more evidence. So my clicker is being overly sensitive here today. So one of the things we're doing is trying to build a wall of evidence, and one study doesn't generally answer all of our questions. We may need to pull together multiple multiple studies to answer it. So here's how we might look at a formulating our annotated bibliography. So up at the top, and you're going to find this on D2L, up at the top is our citation in APA format, so our last name, first initial, middle initial for everyone in the study, our date, the name of the article, the journal name, the volume, and the page numbers. And then you describe what they found. So here's our hypothesis, the methodology used, the results or conclusions, and what's why it's important. And then think about, what did they do well or not? Is this all self-report, for example? Is this a small sample size? Is this only 10-year-old Filipinos, somehow different in some way than the kind of group that you're wanting to think about? Do they have a reasonable control or comparison group? And this is on the assignment. You know, this is what I did for one of the studies or for one of the annotations I did. So again, at the top you see APA format, and then you see first of all, my description of the study, but then in the second paragraph, the limitations. And take care.